there had to be these kind of protests. I mean, François Bayrou, the French prime minister, who sort of answers to Macron, went even further and sort of said this was a dark day for Europe. You know, they have to be seen to be doing that. I mean, no one really has turned around and said to Macron or indeed to Orban, well, you know, what would you actually have done differently?
Tell us about why this deal is not particularly popular within the EU itself, both amongst her supporters and her critics.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying the deal, if the deal is not popular?
Yeah, the trade deal that she signed with Trump.
Yeah, I mean, she's come in for a lot of criticism since the deal, because the EU has ended up with 15% tariffs, basically on almost all the goods that to 10% Britain has got. I mean, she seemed, you know, those television pictures that we saw from Trump's golf course in Turnberry last Sunday, you know, she was there almost as the supplicant, as I think almost everyone is when they meet Donald Trump. And I think people are thinking, well, look, hang on, this is the European Union. It's 27 countries. It's a huge economic force. It's a lot of people, a lot more people than the United States. You know, how come they didn't use this power to drive a harder deal with America than say Britain did?
And what's the general answer to that? Why do people think that? Because, you know, in the past, Ursula von der Leyen has been seen as somebody who's pretty powerful, pretty strong. Even if she hasn't been popular, she's been a force. So why didn't that come to bear in those negotiations with Donald Trump?
I think the problem is that, you know, let's say had this been any other American president and any other trade dispute, and we've had, you know, Europe has had plenty with America in the past. Europe would have played hardball with the Americans. They would have said, okay, well, if you put these tariffs on us, we'll put these tariffs on you, and so on. And they would have been able to use the economic might. But I think the problem that anyone coming up against Donald Trump faces is not just his unpredictability, but also the fact that he bundles together everything. And I mean, you know, the elephant in the room, as it were, during these trade talks was the war in Russia's war against Ukraine, Putin itself, America's attitude towards all of that. And I mean, the Europeans are desperate to keep the Americans on board when it comes to Ukraine. The Europeans have become very, very aware since Trump came to power and made it very clear to them, you know, they're not spending enough on defense. And so this was, in a sense, the price that Europe had to pay to continue to keep Donald Trump sweet on, one could say, the even more important things, which are defending Europe from Russia.
Which kind of feeds into my next question, is there any evidence she could have cut a better deal? And it sounds from what you've said, no.
Well, I mean, let's say in economic terms, yes, Europe could have retaliated or could have threatened harder to retaliate, because at some stage during these negotiations, you know, she said at one point when Trump was threatening to put a 30% tariff on European goods, which was obviously just a negotiating ploy, she said then, you know, we will find an appropriate response. And the trade experts within the European Commission, you know, were looking in great detail at EU-American trade. They were looking at where they could hit the Americans where it hurts. But I think ultimately it was some geopolitics that won out, and this realization, as I said, that, you know, we can't afford to get into a trade war with the Americans because of the consequences, how Trump might react on all these other things.
I wonder as well how much of it is down to, and you write in your piece today, the fact that Ursula von der Leyen had actually a pretty good relationship with the previous US administration under Joe Biden, and whether that also played into Trump's tactics here, the kind of the real hatred of that administration. And with it, you know, he has had a real bee in his bonnet about the EU, hasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I think it played a part, particularly at the beginning of Trump's presidency, when he sort of essentially refused to have anything to do with the EU institutions, anything to do with Ursula von der Leyen. And then he famously, I think it was in February, gave a press conference at which a reporter brought up the question of the EU, and he said it was formed to screw the United States. So, I mean, and it didn't help, I think, that von der Leyen, indeed, as you say, was very, very close to to Joe Biden. The two of them saw eye to eye on a lot of issues. I mean, years ago, Henry Kissinger, the late American Secretary of State, used to complain, we want to get in touch with Europe. Who do we call? And as far as Biden was concerned, it was pretty obvious that on a lot of issues, you called von der Leyen. So, the change of government or change of administration in America has meant Europe has had to kind of look again at its response to America and has to deal with someone who is just very, very different to deal with than Biden was.
How much pressure is Ursula von der Leyen under? I mean, you've talked about some people in Europe. I mean, specifically, where is the pressure coming from and how much is she under?
I mean, she's in I won't say she's in a dangerous position. She's in a sensitive position because she's, she is answerable both to European leaders, the leaders of the 27 member states, and also to the European Parliament. A few weeks back, she faced a vote of confidence in the European Parliament. It was brought by a fairly right-wing Romanian member of the European Parliament, ostensibly about what they call Pfizer Gate, which is a sort of scandal or a mini scandal brewing over von der Leyen's contacts or alleged contacts with the head of the pharmaceutical company during the COVID lockdown. So, I mean, that was the basic reason for the vote. But a lot of her opponents on the other side of the political spectrum, on the left, the Greens, socialists, and so on, they then either abstained or voted against her. So she got through the vote of confidence, which was the first one that had been tabled against a European Commission president since 2014. But there is, lurking in the wings, there was always a fear that there could be more votes of confidence. She's trying essentially to carry out a kind of a balancing act as far as MEPs are concerned, which is during the first term that when she was in office, because she's now into her second one, during the first one, everything was all about the EU's Green Deal, about kind of reducing emissions and so on. Now, this term, it's an awful lot about increasing competitiveness. There's been a political change in a number of European countries. They're kind of shifting to the right. So she has to, keep her supporters on board in the European Parliament, and she also has to, keep the various leaders of the European member state suite as well.
I mean, you write in your piece that the Hungarian leader Viktor Orban claimed that Trump had eaten her for breakfast in those negotiations. I mean, probably not surprising because he is a critic of von der Leyen. But you also mentioned that President Macron was complaining as well that the bloc, the EU, isn't feared enough. But I mean, he apparently helped sign off the deal, so even he's not happy.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is they're largely the politicians, be it Orban to a greater extent, or Macron or other European leaders, are sort of, in a sense, playing to the domestic gallery. They realized that they had to do a deal with the Americans, for all the various geopolitical reasons that we've just been through. But they also know that there are a number of constituencies at home which are going to be unhappy. In the case of the French, it is particularly their wine, spirits exporters, very, very important for the French economy, also for the Italian economy. And so, there had to be these kind of protests. I mean, François Bayrou, the French prime minister, who sort of answers to Macron, went even further and sort of said this was a dark day for Europe. They have to be seen to be doing that. I mean, no one really has turned around and said to Macron, or indeed to Orban, well, what would you actually have done differently? And we've again, from Germany, there has been sort of criticism of the deal, but I think the sense is that it's a bad deal, but it's the best bad deal that they could have got.
Nice way of summing it up. Thank you so much, Peter. Peter Conradi there, the Europe editor of the Sunday Times. And you can read his piece online right now with your digital subscription. Steve gets in touch saying the EU has been used to escalating tariffs in order to get its way. This deal is a result of meeting the single larger economy with Trump willing to use the same playbook.
Yeah, Suzanne says Macron, like Starmer, has no problem selling out his country for a quick deal. Strong opinion there.